You said, quote, most people's CRM is horrible. The level of enrichment most people do is laughable from a, can you actually do anything with this perspective?
And I think that the biggest thing is that it's not the first thing that people think about, right? Lots of things that are sort of easy to plug in. It's very easy to add a new integration. It's sort of very easy to get bad data. And unless you're very intentional about avoiding that and being proactive about not just avoiding it, but also identifying when it's happening, you sort of very quickly end up with this not great situation, which is a lot of work to unravel.
I'm Jacob Tijuana, the founder of Sculpted, which is the first and I believe only service that is focused on Clay for HubSpot, making sure HubSpot CRM is clean, up to date, and you can actually do something with it.
I help a lot of HubSpot ecosystem companies with go-to-market, also write Connected GTM, which is sort of a collection of go-to-market playbooks for teams using HubSpot. And then most recently, working on Account Scout, which is sort of a very HubSpot native, sort of simple company insights replacement for teams that aren't yet ready to make the investment in more custom solution for enrichment like Clay. LinkedIn is definitely the best place to, you can find me pretty active there. Feel free to DM me. Always happy to chat with folks. But yeah, I mean, general go-to-market problems, pretty much all things HubSpot these days is sort of where I tend to hang out and talk about.
I'll say that I'm really excited to be talking to you because I think I first saw you when I was working at Service Bell, and I think Arrows, where you were at the time, was funded by, I think, Gradient as well. I think we were like the same. And so I think that our founder knew your founder, and then I found Arrows, and we eventually bumped into each other at the Inbound conference, not the past one, but the one, I guess, 2023, September 2023
Yep,
in
yep.
Boston. You were rocking the event at this like cool bar next to
Oh yeah, that was Steal This Beer, I think. First year of Steal This Beer.
yeah, and I had also seen your content on LinkedIn at the time, doing tons of stuff for Arrows, which I thought was really cool. And then full circle, here we are, I guess a little over a year later, like a year and some change, maybe a year and almost 6 months actually. Both of us have since moved on from our past roles. You're still very involved in the HubSpot ecosystem, so I would love for you to talk about that. And I have pivoted away from outbound with Clay to HubSpot with Clay. As a HubSpot expert, I'd love to just pick your brain on all things HubSpot, data enrichment, a lot of cool things. So definitely looking forward to diving in.
It's interesting you mentioned the sort of HubSpot crossover. I was never, didn't start out like as a solutions partner or, even like as a HubSpot admin. I've always been in sort of early stage go to market and rolling crossover to product a little bit too, but now very deep in the HubSpot ecosystem across really three different things: Connected GTM, sort of newsletter, playbooks for go to market use cases in HubSpot. I support a lot of HubSpot app partners on go-to-market. So they're usually both in the HubSpot ecosystem and using HubSpot, early stage software companies. And then now, even since we sort of first talked about setting this up, now have a data enrichment product in the HubSpot ecosystem, which will be interesting to talk about because obviously a lot of learning from conversations there, and obviously sort of contrast to Clay and like how that fits together. Also, user of Clay, which is it's just a fun playground.
So I think today we want to talk about the fact that most CRMs, including HubSpot CRMs, are filled with totally incomplete, outdated, low value, untrustworthy data, which leads to the inability to make ability to do anything. I mean, you can't. Your CRM is supposed to be like the motherboard of your go-to-market. You can't pull accurate reports to make strategic decisions on like a high level, and you can't even send marketing emails without having like Inc. or LLC in the subject line, which doesn't look good. So from end to end, it's a big problem. And so I want to talk about why this is happening with you. And some other interesting things that are going on in the HubSpot world right now, like them sunsetting their legacy enrichment solution. And we also both have solutions to improve the data quality so you can actually do stuff with your
Yeah.
HubSpot
Yeah.
data. My solutions are much more complex, custom, probably for larger companies, and yours is, I don't think, as much. So I want to get into sort of the differences, who should use what, why, and ultimately how companies can better drive go-to-market strategy, prioritize accounts, do more effective marketing, improve sales efficiency, all these cool buzzwords with better CRM data.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that's the end goal, right? It's like you've bought into bringing your team into HubSpot to sort of enabling your go-to-market workflows across different teams in one place, all based on, HubSpot selling the connected customer platform, which only works if you have good data, and to your point, not just good data when you start out, but good data over time as you add new sources, as things change, as time moves forward. It's very easy for data to get out of date. So how do you sort of proactively tackle that problem and make sure that your teams always have what they need?
Right on. We had met a few weeks ago to just kind of catch up and discuss, and I pulled out some quotes from our last conversation that I thought were relevant to each section of this conversation. The first one is about the problem, which is why most HubSpot data is garbage. And you said, quote, most people's CRM is horrible. The level of enrichment most people do is laughable from a, can you actually do anything with this perspective? So could you speak sort of about like the problem, like stale data, generic enrichment, duplicate records? Why is this happening? What's the source of the problem and what's the impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing is that it's not the first thing that people think about, right? There's lots of things that are sort of easy to plug in or easy to do in a CRM, which very quickly lead you to having poor data. It's very easy to add a new integration, which is creating contacts from a different source and not checking if they're duplicate, for example. Or it's very easy to have a form that doesn't have any validation on it, and you are adding people with email, and then you're trying to send with email only, and you're trying to send an email which has personalization on, hey, first name is awesome as that personalization is. But it's sort of very easy to get bad data. And unless you're very intentional about avoiding that and being proactive about not just avoiding it, but also identifying when it's happening, you sort of very quickly end up with this not great situation, which is a lot of work to unravel, at least much more work to unravel and resolve than it was to create in the first place. And I think also generally go-to-market approaches and strategies don't start with, let's start small, be really specific about our ICP, and focus only on them and then build out from there. I think it's much more common than it's like, well, we have all these companies that we could possibly target. Let's dump them in the CRM and then figure it out later. Right. And I think that sort of the two things together both compound over time, but also sort of exacerbate the problem that you see in most accounts.
I think also like the existing tool stack to try and solve this now also until Clay or your solution has been lackluster, like ZoomInfo and Apollo, all of these big box providers. It just feels like a lot of companies try and segment by a generic industry and company size. And like that's basically all you get. Maybe an address that's accurate or not. I don't know. There's not a lot of ability to be flexible with, for example, if you have custom definitions of an industry, like one good example is like a company I was working with that sells to e-commerce brands, apparel brands, and they have very specific nomenclature around the category of the brand. Are they a streetwear brand? Are they an activewear brand? Are they a luxury brand? You're not going to get that from any data provider without a person going into it and looking at it and introducing AI. Now you can do things like that too. But a lot of these legacy providers don't have the solution. So, I've spoken to the CEO of a very well-known household brand in the go-to-market tech space, well-loved brand, pretty large company. If I said their name, you would have heard of them. He's like, showing me a Salesforce. He's like, I can't. He's like trying to pull up a company list of. I can't segment at all. Like I don't know what's going on. I have no visibility. I spoke to another leader yesterday who said the same thing. He's like, only 10% of my records are actually good. So the leadership cares a lot because they can't make strategic decisions, but people on the ground, I think, are disconnected. They're like, whatever, I'm just going to pop this into HubSpot and I don't really care. Like, there's kind of a disconnect in incentives and it just leads to this bad data and the can gets kicked down the road is what I've seen.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's the sort of check the box on like, did we integrate this, or did we pull these records, or did we give X number of leads to sales, whatever it is, right? Yeah, it's a great way of putting it. The incentives just aren't aligned with, let's make sure these are actually the right records, the right accounts.
Right.
Have the right data in them to make them complete. And yeah, it ends up in just a really bad spot later.
What do you think is the impact of this? We spoke about the problem, but why should people care? What is the actual issue?
Ultimately, the hardest problem in go-to-market is attention, or is getting attention, right? Like there's just so much noise, and the easiest way to get attention is to be the most relevant to the people that you are ultimately wanting to talk to, right? Like how do you show up with the thing that is the right message at the right time for the right person? And the only way that you get there is by being very specific, by actually researching, actually understanding what is a good fit for for you and for them, and then delivering, I'm going to call it a message, but it could be in content, it could be in an ad, it could be wherever, right? In a way that cuts through the noise and actually stands out. There's just no way that you can do that if you have generic data or no data, right? Like incorrect data is almost worse than no data at all in some ways, because you send the wrong message to the right person and they immediately mark you as spam, or they tune you out because they figure you didn't care enough to send something that was relevant. And I think that that's sort of the job of reaching the right person, ultimately getting to the result that you want, which is probably a booked meeting or a reply, like a positive reply, like some conversation with the person that actually is a good fit, just becomes harder and more expensive the more times you burn them out with the wrong thing.
Yeah, with high company name, LLC, or high blank, or like high first name. Those are all good things. Those are like tactical errors. One of our customers is a fast growing SaaS company going into new markets. They've doubled, tripled year over year, multiple years in a row. And now they're expanding out of like New Zealand and these areas into like America, Europe. Case study coming soon. And one of the things he said was like, I just don't trust my data. I took over HubSpot as a new web apps guy. I don't trust the data. And we're trying to decide where to invest ad budget and where to deploy more reps and like what messaging. But I don't even know because I can't pull accurate reports. I want to talk about the sort of existing solutions. I think one area people are asking about, I posted about this recently. I just had a conversation today with someone about this who didn't seem too happy. HubSpot has sunset their legacy data enrichment
Company insights.
Thank you. And you probably can describe more of what that was and how it worked. And I feel like a lot of executives maybe are being told they need to use AI for their go-to-market and like make things more efficient, but they just don't really get what that it's vague. Like until I saw Clay, for example, when ChatGPT launched, even me, I was like, what's the big deal about this? I don't know. What even is AI? Who cares? But it wasn't until I saw a practical use case from my real world scenario that I really understood, wow, this is really powerful. And then I started diving in. But when you just hear I think it's easy for executives to go out and buy some AI tool to try and satisfy the board's requirements, but then it ends up falling flat and they're like, oh, AI doesn't work. Can you speak about like company insights? When should someone use it or not use it? Like what are the pros and cons of these HubSpot-based solutions for enrichment?
So company insights is HubSpot's sort of, if you have a HubSpot account, you've ever added a company, you've probably seen what Company Insights does. If you add a domain, it adds a name, a logo, and there's 22 data points that are default properties in HubSpot that Company Insights updated. Things like, the address, the technology stack potentially, and these are all things sort of based on availability of that data in the enrichment data set. And that's what's being sunset, I think, March 26th, March 27th. It sort of goes away for everybody. I'm pretty sure that new accounts don't have it. At least none of the ones that I have seen have that anymore, but it goes away for everybody in March. So I think there's sort of different planes to look at data enrichment in your HubSpot account on. It's like, what do I just need to fill because it's empty by default and it's a static value that I want to be updated? And then what do I actually need that is specific? You gave a great example of, custom industries, for example. It's like, I want to do something very specific with this data, which means that I need to define how I get that data, but also what does that data look like once it gets into my HubSpot account, because I want to use it in a specific way. And I think there are a fair number of things like that that are both specific to individual businesses, whether it's because they're in a specific industry or they have a specific way that they want to run their go-to-market motion, or because it's a data point that is going to change over time, and either the current source of it is not always going to be the best source of it, or it's just a dynamic value, right? Like current job postings is a good example of that. Like you need to keep refreshing that. I just mentioned the thing that I have been working on, Account Scout, today is a very direct replacement for Company Insights. I also have been hearing that the data quality is seemingly better than Company Insights, probably because the refresh rate is better, but mostly focused on these are sort of predefined things. There isn't a ton of customization on top. Again, the data will refresh, but not so much focused in the direction of like what we're going to talk about with Clay, which is you define everything because it is specific to your business and you have much more control over pretty much everything about that data, right? Because Clay is not a data provider. I mean, they have some enrichment that is, native Clay enrichment, but it's not really, I'm curious your take on that actually, like as a stance, but like I don't view Clay as a data provider, for example.
Like, should I replace ZoomInfo with Clay? I actually hesitate. I think at some point maybe, but ZoomInfo is usually used, and these other tools are usually used for providing data, like building your source list. Clay is a middle layer between that and the CRM or the sales engagement platform. It's an enrichment layer. It's a data aggregator. It's not another enrichment provider. It's a marketplace or it's an aggregate of different data sources. So you can have 10 different places to look for a mobile number, for an email. You can be very flexible with if you want open job information or if you want company news or scraping the web. And I think that's really what sets it apart from anything else. That's why I'm not nervous about any of these other like native enrichment solutions taking over, because from what I'm understanding from you, and my take as well, is that it's out of the box, which is good for some people, but it has limited ability to be granular in terms of getting really nitty gritty about what you're doing. And it's also perhaps a fixed data set. It's not dynamic. So if you want to track, do intent, or look at ongoing change, things that are changing all the time, it's not going to happen. And I'll get to that more in a second about how we're automating HubSpot enrichment with Clay to like keep your CRM healthy, which is another problem. Is if you let your CRM, if you do a one-time cleanup even with something like Breeze or ZoomInfo, but you don't ever touch it again, and a year later it's back to the way it was. So The downfall of these generic out-of-the-box solutions and the downfall of the Achilles heel, maybe is a better word to put it. Limitation, yeah, is AI and enrichment. It's only as good as AI in particular is only as good as the inputs in which you give it and how granular you can be. So you can only like use a fixed set of data from like a HubSpot data set or a Clearbit data set, which is usually like company name, job title, just like these basic data points. You can only do so much with AI anyway. You can do basic things that are nice, like fixing company names. But like you said, to do things like going out in the world and looking for new information, like open job counts. One company I was talking to, they help forward-thinking companies with nice like office food programs. Like you have a cool office in like a WeWork or something, and you want to have a lot of food stocked in the shelves. They help the office manager easily order the food and track everything. So they want to go and look at like a careers page and see if they have like an office like lunch policy or food programs listed there as like a benefit. That's super custom. You can't get that, So those are things that Clay can do. We can scrape the web, you can pull in the data, and then use AI to make a decision, yes or no, true or false, based on qualitative information into quantitative information. You can't do that with an out-of-the-box solution. But if you don't need that level of customization, there's no sense in hiring a Clay agency, which is lots of money, and Clay, and spending all the time, etc., to stand that up. It's better to go with an out-of-the-box solution. So it kind of depends on your needs and your size, your stage, that kind of thing.
I think it's, to your point, it's like, what are you going to go do with that data? I think that's sort of the starting point for all this. It's like having clean CRM data is great, but there's no sort of prizes for like my CRM is the cleanest, right? What is the performance of the campaigns, the go-to-market strategy that I'm running against that data? So if you're running on the back end, and I'm curious to get your sort of hear like some of the journey from like, we're working with Clay, we're doing predominantly cold outbound, to like we're focused on the data hygiene piece, because presumably in that example where somebody is looking at going out scraping the web careers pages to find, yes, this is a company that has a a lunch policy versus not, like you're going to treat the company that does very differently than the company that doesn't, whether you just don't talk to like the company that doesn't have a policy entirely, or whether you're running just a different campaign at them. I'm curious your sort of what you're seeing on that side. Like how far across the go-to-market motion are you seeing like Clay proliferate? Like is it just you want this data so that you can run cold, you can run this data so that you can send email, or there's like a broader application of that sort of dynamic data?
Data is the foundation of go-to-market. It's not just actually Clay was around for 6 years. When I found Clay 2 years ago, it was 6 years, maybe it's 7 or 8 now. Their first 5 of those 6 years before I had found them, I think they were thinking about shutting down. They had no traction. Their founders had a vision of like this data, like really smart spreadsheet, but there wasn't a specific market. And you always hear, I think, riches in the niches, right? So Varun, their now co-founder, came in as like an operations guy, and he started poking around in like Slack channels and picked the outbound use case because agency owners and like these outbound people got it. They like, oh, this is crazy. So outbound was for sure what they went from zero to, I think, $500 million valuation the first time around, like a few months ago, before they got to 1.25 billion. But yeah, definitely outbound was their bread and butter. I think they shifted towards more general applications of the data for both the reasons that I wanted to shift. Also, I think at a certain point you have to, if you're going to keep fueling growth, you have to go into new markets. So outbound definitely was the primary use case for a long time, but I think it always has been that data is applied to marketing, to like LinkedIn ad campaigns. I give you a few examples, and now I think people like me, you, and Clay are leaning more into it. So, for example, if you use Clay to do a really wild enrichment on your ICP and score all your accounts, you can do outbound to them, but you can also do much better like LinkedIn B2B ad campaigns because you're doing much more targeted advertising. I also mentioned already just for like reporting and decision making purposes. So the data is not just for outbound. It's useful for outbound, but it's about, I think, the whole go to market. You actually mentioned in our last call, the shift from automated outbound to automated research is happening. Every company needs a list, needs to know enough about that list, and then needs to do the most relevant thing for that list. So there's a new approach. Instead of manually searching for information or relying on generic enrichment tools, companies should instead, they can automate all this data collection, right? They can enrich intelligently instead of dumping all this information into HubSpot. They can use rules to only add the most relevant information, the most up-to-date information. And they can make it actionable with AI, yeah? I'm curious, maybe along these same lines of outreach and how to use the data. Going from automated outbound as the sole use case to maybe automated research, and then speaking about how you can apply that across the go-to-market. Maybe you could share some more thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I really like a lot of Jordan Crawford's thoughts or sort of takes on this, is that if you start with, I mentioned this sort of right at the start, like the hardest thing in go-to-market, the hardest problem to solve is like, how can you be the most relevant so that you cut through the noise and you actually get your message to the right person at the right time? And whether that's, whatever channel you're going through. And I think that when you start with the research, you actually understand, A, like who are we a good fit for? Like if the companies that we're winning deals with and beyond that are sort of successful with our product, like what are the characteristics, or like what are the things that make, like beyond, industry and job title, like what are the reasons that people actually buy the thing that we sell? Like what is the problem that it solves? Like what is the outcome that they're delivering, and sort of what are the commonalities there? And then like how do we go find more companies that are in that same situation, right? That have that same context, so that we can send a message, which, and this is I think where the both the shift in outbound but also like how it's more broadly applicable, is like when you get the relevance right and you get the research right, you can send a much simpler message, because you're speaking to the right person about the right problem, and you can sort of match the context with your business pain, right? Like the thing that you're trying to solve, like here are the things that we're seeing or that we see that typically lead to this problem. Here's some examples of how we solve that problem, like how you could, not even we necessarily, but like how you could solve that problem. Is this a problem that you want to solve? And to your point about, it's not just in a cold email, it's like in ads, it's in website messaging, it's around like the follow-up that you send to somebody who signs up, or the content that you send to somebody who subscribes to a newsletter or an email list. Like how do you segment sort of at every opportunity to get to the most relevant thing for each person that you're trying to reach? Like how do you build an expansion strategy for an existing account, for example, by continuing to be relevant and just sort of matching up like what you do with what the problem is that they're trying to solve? Unless you start with being really intentional about like these are the people, or like these are the problems that we want to solve for, you need a starting point to go sort of dig deeper and figure out what the context is.
So on that note, actually, it's a nice transition to how do you action this? We're talking about a lot of theory. What's the practical steps to make this happen? There's a pretty typical process I run, which is involved with like deciding what are these factors. I have a lot of background in go-to-market, sales, marketing, and some technical skills, and then my co-founder is an engineer, so we can kind of bridge the gap between like the business problem and the technical solution. But it starts out with a business problem, which is who do you want to speak to? What are the problems they're having? And what are the symptoms of that pain that you can go look for in the market? Signals, for example. Also, just things like how do you think about segmentation, and if you had like the perfect company record, what would that look like? What's all the information on that record that you want to know? And I walk through an exercise where I actually scope all of these properties out. I ask them all the different information that they want, and ultimately we actually will map it into HubSpot properties with the exact output values, the right property types, property names, etc., override rules, and it's all there. Then we will take it into Clay and we'll build the enrichment workflows to service that information. So Clay has 100 plus different enrichment providers that you can call on. You can integrate non-native providers yourself if you'd like. And there's also the huge AI component, which is really cool, where you can get into custom. One of our customers, they have like a brand recognition or brand affinity tracking tool, and selling to B2C companies is very important for them. And deciding if a company is B2B or B2C is like a human task until AI came around. So just things like that, like we will build the enrichments and the AI prompts to service that information, and then back up your CRM first, but then we can update your entire database and push all of it into HubSpot for a one-time cleanup. So it's actually there, and now you can service the reps. You can put it in your reporting. The second step of 3 is you'll connect Clay to HubSpot for ongoing enrichment to keep it clean, because maybe periodically things change, things update, like you said, dynamic information you want to re-enrich and keep it up to date. And then the third component is net new records entering the CRM, like from form fills, from list imports, from things like that. You can have Clay intercept that information and enrich with this newly built enrichment model so that your entire CRM is clean. That's kind of how I'm solving it. I'm curious your take on that, or like how you're approaching it with your solution, to maybe some of the differences.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're pretty different sort of levels of solution, I guess. I would say, like, I think that the approach totally makes sense if you're investing in like the custom enrichment layer, right? Like that you really start to see as you sort of talk through that, like why you need middleware in the gap between the data provider and the CRM, right? Like there's a lot of decision making that happens in what are the accepted values for all of these different things. Like what is the right source for this property versus that property, for example. They may be very different, right? To get the highest quality data for every data point that you care about. And then I think that especially is the almost the sort of like mapping, or like it's both mapping but also transformation layer, right? Like point about like B2B versus B2C sort of classification. It's like you need some kind of transformation to happen there. Like companies generally aren't saying, hey, I'm B2B, right? Or I'm B2C. Like maybe they are, but like generally you're going to have some kind of rule-based or sort of some decision making around that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, usually like look at a LinkedIn company description or scrape the site and make a paragraph of what they do with AI, and then feed that context into a follow-up prompt that takes the information and make a decision and bucket it and then push it in. So taking things like that and doing those additional manipulations is happening.
Yeah, and I mean that's definitely things that I've seen like in the 3 weeks or whatever, 2 weeks I've been like working on the new project that I'm working on. Like that has been the bulk of the work is in the mapping and transformation from here's what we're finding to here's what's actually useful and sort of standardized in a way that you can actually compare or do things with the data in HubSpot. That's sort of the differences I think will end up being like. I mean, who knows where this project sort of ultimately ends up going, but I think that's sort of the approach is like what are the most common things that you could go do in Clay and like make them more of an out of the box solution, but sort of with that same approach that it's like it's not from a static data set. The sort of value is in that like transformation and decision making, like the business rules around your data, which I think is the layer that's really missing from sort of typical maybe legacy data providers.
What's the future of CRM enrichment in HubSpot? Like, where are things going from here?
I think that the putting business logic in the middle is sort of the like everybody's going to have to get there because or like that's going to become the differentiating sort of factor that actually makes it usable because the cost of data is going to go down, right? Like I think that it's just going to be like you see like there's new AI agents every day, like Operator, for example, like you can like if it's on the web, like you have it for essentially free, which means that it's not about can you get the data, it's about what do you do with the data or how do you make the data usable for your team. So I think that, you know, Clay is sort of perfectly positioned for solving for that problem. And I think that that's sort of ultimately it's a thing that you have to invest in building a model, or you mentioned sort of the, you know, the enrichment model that you have to be able to apply the data to your own business. And I think that being intentional about first off, like who are the accounts, right? Like let's not just start by dumping data in the CRM, but like who do we actually want to have in our CRM, and then what are the business rules that we put around making sure that we know when we have the accounts that we want and making sure that we have the information about the accounts that we want available is going to be sort of the critical piece. And using a tool like Clay and somebody who knows what they're doing with Clay, whether that's internal or external, is certainly how you get there.
Yeah, that's sort of what's happening. It's this cool middle layer that used to have to be done by humans. I think the rise of AI is really what's fueled this. Clay's idea to have many different providers in one place is a good idea, but I still think it would have fallen short had it not been for OpenAI and ChatGPT and natural language processing, LLMs rising at the exact same time. Because when you can combine that enrichment data and the web scraping with AI, like it's making it way cheaper, way more actionable, and the ability to turn qualitative information into quantitative, meaning like reading something and making a decision, yes or no, was only possible with a person.
For sure.
We started out automating, like in the Industrial Revolution, we automated like our hands, I guess. You know what I mean? Like in our bodies, like action. Internet, we automated our mouths, like communication. And now we're automating our brains. Like it's kind of scary, but
Yeah.
the ability to do that is crazy. It unlocks insane business outcomes. What I do a lot of is translating your business problem into like a data solution and bridging that gap by understanding based on what you are looking to do, what information do you need, how are we going to get it, and then how are we going to surface it to you in a way that makes sense for you and your team in your CRM.
I will say that I use Clay. The columns that I have in Clay are much more frequently like prompting AI to do something than they are like a standard like enrichment of
Same.
something using a data provider, right? It's like that's sort of almost like the last step. Like once you get to the point of like we know that this is the right account.
Collision is probably I think my most popular use, or like the ChatGPT manipulation feature to like take just to create content with ChatGPT in the system.